Now I am pleased to be joined by a remarkable group of creative minds. Flutist Tim Munro is a renowned champion of contemporary music. Composers Beth Kirsten and Eve Beglarian are bold and original voices in contemporary American music. Tim is joining us from Chicago, Eve is joining us from Vermont, and AB is joining us from Oberlin, Ohio. Welcome to all of you. So glad you're here.
Thanks, Daniel.
Be here.
Yeah.
Pleasure to be here, for sure.
Great, yeah. To start us off, Tim, why don't you give us a quick overview of your set today?
So I found this time incredibly challenging. I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing or who I am at the moment. It's very strange. And I've been looking for solid ground. And where I'm finding solid ground is in the voices that for me are speaking from like their heart to my heart. And so there's so many people that encompasses. But I really wanted for this set to bring to an audience during this time composers who are just like themselves and vulnerable and speak from their heart to other hearts. So I'm playing Amy Beth's Pirouette on a Moon Sliver, just the first movement, partially because that piece is the weirdest piece I've ever played that communicates to every audience member. I don't think I've ever had somebody not have a great, intense reaction to that piece. And Eve's I Will Not Be Sad in This World, because all I'm listening to at the moment, I think, is vocal consort music. And Eve's piece allows me to sort of be part of a choir of voices at a time when just like that is really speaking to my heart. Beautiful.
So you will start your set with AB's piece, Pirouette. So turning now to you, AB, your piece riffs a little on the stock character of Harlequin. Maybe you can tell us about that character and how he inspired your piece?
Well, sure. So Pirouette on a Moon Sliver is as a study piece, actually, for a larger work called Columbine's Paradise Theater that I wrote for Ape Blackbird. And when I was kind of exploring these characters, it was right around the time that Tim and I met and really kind of had this wonderful musical synergy. And I just knew I wanted to write something for him that was sort of, that would expand upon, what I had seen him do already and sort of like, and also push me to a new level of exploring the flute and exploring this theatrical character. Harlequin is kind of a trickster, and when I was researching this character, I just was having nightmares about this evil Harlequin, and so I decided I sort of just had to go with it. So, yeah.
Turning now to your piece, Eve, as I was learning about this beautiful work, I was fascinated to read that your piece transforms a song by an Armenian singer-songwriter. And I wondered if you could tell us a little about that source material, what it means to you, and how it came to be part of this piece.
I love that you call Sayat Nova a singer-songwriter, which is actually technically completely right, but he's like an 18th century guy. And so we don't usually apply that term to an 18th century singer-songwriter, but that's definitely what he is. And part of, I think, what draws me to him in particular is that he was born in Tbilisi, which was a very cosmopolitan place in the 18th century. You had Azeris and Turks and Armenians and Georgians all sort of living together and interacting together, and lots of language macaronic stuff going on. And so it's like the apotheosis of a kind of cosmopolitan way of living that in fact ended up being destroyed. He was killed for not embracing Islam at some point when there were pogroms going on or whatever. So so the idea that the piece is called "I Will Not Be Sad in This World" is coming from a place of fully understanding how hard it can be not to be sad in this world. But it's so beautifully said, because this world implies something unutterably beautiful at the same time as being full of sorrow.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I was actually doing a residency in Italy at the time, at Civitella Ranieri, and I was in an old tobacco barn that had been converted into a studio. So it had windows. It was like maybe 3 stories tall, and it had windows going all the way up. In fact, there weren't windows on the ground part of it. Like the first story had no windows. So everything was a clerestory window. So the light came in always refracted, but with this dazzling brightness because it was up high. And when you went outside, you were in like an olive grove. It was stunning. It was the most stunning place. And so writing this piece, which really meant improvising the tape part, which is all made out of my voice, was one of these blissful afternoons. I'll never forget it, where I just was like, oh, this is what I should do, is a version of this piece. And so I got out the microphone and started singing and making the tape part, just like with no forethought. It just flowed right out.
Wow.
And it was really fun. And so for me, the piece contains that in a certain way, that piece came with no struggle, with no angst. It was like composer heaven, where you've had lunch, you're not hungry, you're not cranky, all your needs are met, you're in this beautiful place, and the piece just shows up, Like, how many times in my life has it ever felt that way? I don't know. Not many.
So, Tim, I don't know if you want to spoil any surprises, but did you want to say anything about how you decided to present these works today?
We have you might even be able to hear in the background, my wife is putting our 5.5-month-old to sleep. So like, this is also what I'm experiencing in this time. And it was important for me to acknowledge that in kind of like making recordings of these pieces for this moment. So I won't spoil the surprise for Amy Beth's piece, but I will say that the piece works best when there's an audience. And so I wanted to make sure that that was the case. And for Eve's piece, I wanted it to be at nighttime. And we're just like, my wife and I are going to string up some lights and we'll see what happens. I love acknowledging, though, that not trying to pretend that this is a concert hall and that this is going to be like the ideal like classical vision of whatever, but really like embracing this situation for all of its, unexpected joys, actually.
Absolutely. But before we go, I'm curious if any of you would like to share how you've been spending this time, this social isolation, and if it's impacted your creative work, or if it's been a creative blossoming, or if it's been difficult to work, or how you're all feeling.
I've been here in Oberlin since January, and it's kind of been a spiritual blossoming more than anything, because I found that the only way that I can deal with the horrifying news is to turn inward. And so I've just been trying to deepen my meditation practice, and that what goes along with that is walking between 5 and 8 miles every day in the morning at 5 a.m. And what what I've really been focused on is just trying to make sure that I'm well so that I can be there for my students who are struggling, some of them a lot, and my friends in Italy who are really struggling. And so I want to be somebody that people can lean on in this time, because I'm I feel solid now that I'm walking so much, and meditating so much, that so that's kind of been my focus.
I mean, I'm terrified. I spend most days terrified. I'm finding it difficult. I will say that having a 5.5-month-old is actually helpful in a certain way, and just like I have a daily task. I mean, like Amy Beth, I'm also finding real joy in whenever I can offer like mentorship or just like tiny little bits of assistance in whatever ways I can.
Yeah, for me, the strangeness of this has been that I'm accustomed to a good amount of solitude when I'm here in Vermont, because I sort of set up this life here in Vermont in contradistinction to my life in New York. But it feels entirely different from voluntary solitude, right? It's a whole completely different thing. Yeah. And so I really have taken it slow, not putting any demands on myself, because with everything canceled, like there are no real deadlines, right? I mean, and I think it's actually my job as an artist to sort of pay attention to where we are rather than impose something on this time, right? Like my job is to take it in and not worry about making sense of it until it wants to be made sense of somehow.
Yeah, that's what this period has brought home to me as well. So it's so amazing to speak with the three of you. You're all such deep thinkers and have so much to say, and this has been a great conversation. I thank you all very, very much for your time.
Totally a pleasure.
Thank you.
Yes, yeah. And now it's time to turn it over to Tim and enjoy Tim's wonderful performances.
Can't wait.
Yes.